Red with dew, low bends the tiny. Shun, son of poverty, for my stream. Your
Lord, and the awful.
Ribs and a leg badly broken. Do you know the story of he came to the book?
Randolph.
And the fever has passed.
It will not.
The knife enters before the fire can flicker. One moment, a young woman is crouched beside an old traveler's camp, believing she has found easy prey. The next, Robin has her wrist twisted behind her back and cold steel pressed beneath her jaw. He tells her she made one mistake. She bathed. In this empty peatland, where rain smothers tracks and darkness swallows faces, the clean scent carried farther than footsteps. She struggles. He drives the blade through her skull. Silence. This is not the laughing outlaw from tavern songs. No green cloak, no noble smile, only a weather-beaten killer, alone beneath a black sky, waiting for death to finally recognize him. At dawn, the woman's body lies beneath a thin cover of mud and heather. Robin washes his hands in brown water, but the blood remains trapped beneath his nails. His beard is white, his shoulders bent, yet every movement carries the memory of violence. Across England, children still hear stories of the Prince of Thieves, the archer who robbed cruel lords and fed hungry families. Robin hears those stories too. They follow him from village fires, sung by men who never saw what he did after the arrows stopped. Lies upon lies. He stole because he wanted what others had. He killed because killing made the world simple. And now, half the country has a father, brother, or son buried because of him. For years, Robin has hidden among the hills, moving whenever smoke appears on the horizon. He eats what he traps, sleeps with a knife beneath his palm, and speaks to no one. Yet each night, the past sits beside him. He sees burning roofs, hears horses screaming, feels the recoil of a bowstring against fingers that once never missed. He tells himself he is searching for peace, but peace is not what he wants. He wants punishment. A final blade, a final arrow. Something violent enough to make the ending feel earned. Except death refuses to come. It leaves him waking every morning, older, colder, and angrier that the world still expects him to breathe. Then a familiar voice cuts through the wind. "You look terrible." Robin turns, knife already drawn, and finds little John standing on the ridge. John is older too, though time has not softened him. He now calls himself Edward, wears a farmer's coat, and carries exhaustion where laughter used to live. The two men stare at each other like survivors meeting beside a grave. No embrace, no smile. John has built a life away from the legend, but that life is collapsing. His supplies are gone. Enemies are closing in. Somewhere behind him waits the one person he cannot abandon. He needs Robin's help, just once more. One last journey, he says, almost laughing. A good adventure. Robin refuses before John finishes. Adventures are stories told after the screaming ends. John knows that better than anyone. But hunger has sharpened his face, and desperation makes his eyes restless. He leads Robin toward a lonely holding where a man guards sacks of bread. John asks. The man refuses. Words become shoves. Shoves become fists. Robin watches without moving as his oldest companion beats the man into the earth for food. The sound is wet and dull. When John finally stops, bread lies scattered in the mud beside a body that no longer moves. "This is what we were," Robin whispers. John wipes blood from his mouth. No, this is what we still are. That answer should make Robin walk away. Instead, it wakes something inside him. Not loyalty, not courage, the old hunger. He hates John for bringing it back, and hates himself more for feeling alive. As they travel, John explains the danger in broken pieces. Armed men have taken the road ahead, men with old grudges and fresh steel. They know John's false name. They know where he has been hiding. Worse, they may know who travels beside him. Robin tightens the leather around his wrist and looks toward the valley below. Mist curls between the trees, too quiet, no birds, no cartwheels. Even the wind seems to have stepped back. Someone is waiting down there. John reaches for his sword. Robin stops him. In the wet grass beside the road, a single footprint points the wrong direction. A decoy. His eyes move to the trees, then to the ridge behind them. There, a flash of metal. Robin shoves John down as an arrow tears through the space where his throat had been. Men rise from the fog on every side. Some carry axes. Others carry faces Robin remembers from burning villages and blood-soaked courtyards. One of them calls his name, not the name in the songs, but the name spoken by dying men. Robin draws his bow. His hand stops shaking. For the first time in years, he smiles. Then he realizes the attackers are not aiming at him. They are aiming past him, towards someone John has kept hidden. The first arrow misses John by an inch and buries itself in the tree behind him. The second does not miss. It strikes the figure emerging from the mist, a boy no older than 14, carrying a sack of grain against his chest. He falls without a sound. John screams his name and runs, but Robin catches him by the coat and drags him behind a fallen trunk as arrows hammer the wood. So this is the person John kept hidden. His son. A child Robin never knew existed, bleeding into the earth because old enemies had finally found the father. John tries to rise. Robin forces him down. Move and you die. The words come out cold, almost cruel, but his hands are already working. He studies the slope, the wind, the spaces between trees. 6 men, maybe 8, 1 archer on the ridge, 2 circling left, the rest waiting for panic. It is a trap designed by someone who knows how Robin thinks. That frightens him more than the arrows. He snaps a branch, throws it into the mist, and watches 3 shafts chase the sound. Then he stands. 1 breath, 1 shot. The ridge archer drops with Robin's arrow buried through his eye. Everything happens fast after that. Robin moves through the trees like the years have fallen from his bones. He fires, ducks, rolls, fires again. A man charges with an axe. Robin catches the handle, twists, and drives the attacker's own blade beneath his ribs. Another comes from behind. John reaches him first. Steel flashes. Blood sprays across the wet leaves. For a few terrible seconds, the forest remembers them. Not as old men, not as broken legends, but as the monsters they once chose to become. When the last attacker falls, the silence feels ashamed. John crawls to the boy. His name is Thomas. The arrow has passed through the soft flesh below his shoulder, missing the heart, but the blood will not stop. Robin presses cloth into the wound while Thomas bites down on his sleeve. The boy looks at him through tears. Are you really Robin Hood? Robin freezes. John lowers his eyes. Even now, even here, the legend has arrived before the man. Robin says nothing. Thomas gives a weak, frightened smile. My father said you never left anyone behind. The words cut deeper than any blade. Robin looks at John. John cannot meet his gaze. They carry Thomas toward an abandoned chapel beyond the marsh. Every step draws a groan from the boy. Rain begins again, thin and icy, washing red lines down Robin's wrists. Inside the chapel, broken saints stare from the walls while John lights a fire beneath the shattered altar. He finally tells the truth. Thomas is not his son by blood. Years ago, after one of their raids, John found him beneath a burned wagon beside his dead mother. Robin remembers that village. He remembers ordering the attack because the local lord had refused to pay. He remembers the flames spreading faster than expected. What he does not remember is checking who remained alive. John says he raised the boy because someone had to answer for what they had done. He changed his name, buried his sword, and tried to become a decent man. But decency did not erase the past. The attackers were survivors from the same village, led by a man called Guy of Gisborne. At that name, Robin's fingers tighten. Gisborne should be dead. Robin watched him fall from a tower 20 years ago with an arrow in his chest. Yet one of the bodies outside carried Gisborne's black wolf carved into the leather of his armor. Dead men do not send hunters. unless they were never dead at all. Thomas begins to shake. Fever. The arrowhead was coated with something dark and bitter-smelling. Poison. John searches the attacker's packs and finds no cure, only a scrap of parchment marked with directions to a priory hidden in the northern hills. Beneath the map, someone has written a message in fresh ink: "Bring Robin alive," and the boy receives medicine. John stares at the words until his face goes empty. Robin almost laughs. The trap was never meant to kill them. The arrows, the ambush, even Thomas's wound. Every piece was arranged to force Robin toward the priory. John refuses. He says they will find another healer. Robin looks at Thomas curled beside the fire, skin pale, breath turning shallow. There is no time for hope built on lies. He folds the parchment and slips it inside his coat. John grabs his arm. "They want you." Robin meets his eyes. Then for once, give them what they want. Outside, thunder rolls over the hills. Robin walks into the rain alone, unaware that Thomas has opened his eyes, and is quietly holding the dead attacker's black wolf pendant in his fist. Robin does not reach the northern road before John catches him. He hears the heavy steps behind him, then the scrape of steel leaving its sheath. For one heartbeat, Robin thinks John has come to stop him by force. Part of him almost welcomes it. A clean fight beneath the rain. An ending between the only two men who understand what they became. But John walks past him and keeps moving toward the hills. "You always were useless alone," he mutters. Behind them, Thomas rides across a stolen horse, pale and sweating, tied upright with blankets. The boy should not be conscious, yet his eyes remain fixed on Robin. They travel until the marsh gives way to black pines. The poison moves slowly, but it moves. Thomas's fingers turn blue at the tips. His breathing rattles whenever the path climbs. John speaks to him constantly about warm bread, summer rivers, a farm near Nottingham where they will go when this is over. Robin listens from ahead. Each promise sounds like a prayer made by a man who no longer believes anyone is listening. Once, John had laughed during battles. He would charge through arrows as if the world could not touch him. Now every small sound from Thomas makes him flinch. Near sunset, they shelter beneath a ruined watchtower. John builds a fire while Robin examines the black wolf pendant. The carving is rough, but the metal is expensive. On its back, almost hidden beneath dried blood, are 3 letters. M.A.R. Robin knows them. Marion. He closes his fist so quickly, the pendant cuts his palm. For years, he has carried the memory of her as something pure, the one person who saw goodness inside him before it died. She vanished after their last campaign. Robin told himself she escaped England. John told him she was dead. Neither story had ever felt true. Thomas watches him from the fire. "My father says you saved people." Robin looks toward John. He says many things. Thomas struggles upright, jaw trembling from fever. "Did you save him?" The question leaves nowhere to hide. Robin remembers John at 17, trapped beneath a dead horse while soldiers closed in. Robin had risked his life to pull him free. But he also remembers the years after, when he dragged John from robbery to robbery, convincing him that cruelty was justice because poor men cheered when rich men bled. "Once," Robin says. "Then I ruined him slowly." John stares into the flames and does not argue. Rain taps against the broken stones. Thomas asks why songs make Robin sound happy. Robin almost smiles. "Because no one sings about the smell." The boy waits. Robin describes it before he can stop himself. Wet wool, horse sweat, open stomachs, burned hair. He tells Thomas that battles are not thunder and glory. They are men calling for mothers who cannot hear them. They are friends stepping over bodies because stopping means joining them. His voice grows quieter. "I kept telling myself the next death would buy something better. Freedom, food, revenge. But every death only purchased another." Thomas looks frightened now, not of the poison but of the man beside him. Robin prefers that. Fear is more honest than worship. Later, while John sleeps beside the boy, Robin stands alone outside the tower. The forest is still. Too still. He feels Marion's initials pressing through his coat. He remembers her hands cleaning blood from his face after his first killing. She had asked whether the dead man deserved it. Robin had answered yes without hesitation. Marion had looked at him for a long time and whispered, "That was not my question." He never understood what she meant. Or maybe he understood perfectly and chose not to answer. A twig snaps behind him. Robin turns with an arrow drawn. Thomas stands in the doorway, barely able to remain upright. In his hand is the black wolf pendant. Robin reaches for it, but the boy closes his fist. "I have seen this before," Thomas whispers. "Years ago, John kept a wooden chest beneath their floor. Inside were letters, maps, and a painted portrait of a woman wearing this same symbol." Thomas read one letter before John caught him. It said Robin had not been abandoned. He had been protected. From the truth about the final raid, from the king, and from himself. John appears behind the boy. His face changes when he sees the pendant. No denial, no confusion, only dread. Robin lowers the bow and asks the question he has carried for 20 years. "Where is Marion?" John says nothing. Thomas sways as another wave of poison tears through him. Robin grabs John by the throat and slams him against the stone. The old tower shakes with the impact. "You buried the answer with every lie," Robin growls. "Dig it up." John's eyes fill, but his voice stays steady. "Marion is alive." The words stop the rain, stop the wind, stop everything. Then John adds the part that breaks whatever remains inside Robin. "She is waiting at the priory, and she is the one who sent for you." Marion's name lands harder than any weapon. Robin releases John, but his fingers remain curled as if they still circle his throat. Thomas collapses between them. The boy's body jerks once, then goes frighteningly still. John drops to his knees and presses an ear against his chest. A heartbeat, weak, slipping. There is no time left for rage, yet rage is all Robin has. He lifts Thomas onto the horse and orders John to lead them to the priory. John hesitates. That single pause says more than every lie before it. "You knew the road," Robin whispers, "from the beginning." The priory appears before dawn, hidden inside a valley of white stone and dead trees. No bells, no crosses above the gate. Only the black wolf carved into the arch. Robin reaches for his bow, but John quietly removes the string. "Not here." Robin turns on him. John does not flinch. "You came for the boy. Remember that." The gate opens before they knock. Women in gray robes carry Thomas inside while armed men surround Robin. Their armor bears the same symbol as the attackers he killed. No one raises a weapon. They simply stare. Some are missing hands. One man has a burn scar where half his face should be. Robin recognizes them. Not their names, their wounds. A woman crosses the courtyard beneath the falling rain. Her hair, once red, is threaded with silver. A pale scar runs from her temple to her jaw, but time has not changed her eyes. Marion stops several steps away. Robin cannot breathe. For years, he imagined this moment differently. Her running to him, striking him, weeping, anything that proved some part of the past still belonged to them. Instead, she looks at him as a healer might look at an infected wound. Something painful. Something dangerous. Something that should have been cut away long ago. "You took your time," she says. Robin's mouth opens, but no words come. John speaks for him. The poison is spreading. Marion glances toward the infirmary. "It is not poison." Silence. She explains that the arrow carried a sleeping draught mixed with fever root. Painful, frightening, but rarely fatal. Thomas will wake before nightfall. John closes his eyes with relief. Robin feels none. He looks at the armed men. "You attacked us." Marion shakes her head. "They were ordered to surround you, to frighten you forward. You killed 7 before they could speak." 7. The number hangs in the courtyard. Robin reaches inside his coat and removes the pendant. Marion does not take it. "The wolf was never Gisborne's mark," she says. "It was mine." Years ago, when Robin's raids became slaughter, Marion began moving survivors through hidden roads. Villagers. Orphans. Wounded soldiers abandoned by both kings and rebels. The Black Wolf guided them towards safety. Robin had seen the symbol on burned homes and assumed it belonged to his enemy, so he hunted everyone who carried it. John knew. The betrayal hits without warning. Robin turns, and John's face confirms everything. John had helped Marion rescue survivors after each raid. He had hidden names, letters, even witnesses. Not to protect Robin from the king, but to protect the wounded from Robin. "You stood beside me," Robin says. John's voice breaks. "I was afraid of you." Robin takes one step back. Nothing has ever cut him so cleanly. Then Marion reveals why she summoned him. Guy of Gisborne is alive, but he did not organize the ambush. He has been living inside the priory for 12 years, crippled by Robin's arrow, and protected by the very people he once hunted. Gisborne remembers the final raid differently. According to him, Robin did not merely lose control when the village burned. He gave the order deliberately. Marion has spent years gathering witnesses because the Crown is preparing to turn Robin's legend into law, pardoning every crime, declaring him a hero, and erasing the dead beneath a song. She wants Robin to confess publicly before that happens. Robin laughs once. Empty. You dragged me here for words? No, Marion replies. I brought you here because one witness is still missing. The infirmary door opens. Thomas stands unsteadily between two healers, awake and pale. In his hand is a folded piece of parchment taken from John's hidden chest. He looks directly at Robin, eyes wet with terror. I know who burned my village, the boy says. And it wasn't you. Thomas unfolds the parchment with trembling hands. The ink has faded, but John recognizes the seal before anyone else does. He lunges forward. Marion blocks him. Robin watches the fear spread across his oldest friend's face and understands that whatever comes next has been buried deeper than Marion, deeper than Gisborne, deeper than every lie told to protect him. Thomas reads slowly. The order to burn the village bears John's name, not Robin's. John had commanded the men to set fire to the eastern houses, believing royal soldiers were hidden inside. There were no soldiers, only families sheltering from the rain. Robin turns toward him. Say it is forged. John cannot. The courtyard tightens around them. Survivors step closer, scars shining beneath the gray morning. Marion explains that Robin arrived after the flames had already spread. He saw the dead, saw John standing among the smoke, and made a choice. He claimed the order as his own. No trial, no questions. He protected John because John had once protected him. From that day forward, the massacre became another crime attached to Robin Hood's name. John allowed it because cowardice was easier than confession. Robin carried the guilt until it hollowed him out. John built a quiet life and called it redemption. Robin strikes him. The blow sends John into the mud. He rises without defending himself. Robin hits him again and again. Each punch sounds like a door being broken open. John's lip splits. One eye closes. Still, he does not lift his hands. Fight me, Robin growls. John shakes his head. I already did. For 20 years. Every morning I woke up and let you believe you were worse than me. Robin raises his fist, but Thomas steps between them. Small, feverish, terrified. Protective of the man who destroyed his childhood without ever knowing it. Robin's fist stops. Thomas says John saved him from the flames, carried him through burning timber, fed him, raised him, sat beside him through every winter sickness. The same hands that caused the horror also gave him a life afterward. Thomas hates him, loves him, cannot separate the two. His voice cracks as he asks the question no one can answer. If a man spends 20 years repairing one terrible act, does the terrible act ever become smaller? Before anyone speaks, the priory bell rings. Once, twice, then wildly. A lookout runs from the western wall. Riders are entering the valley, dozens of them, wearing the king's colors. At their front rides the sheriff's commander, carrying a sealed proclamation. Marion's face hardens. The crown has arrived early. They intend to declare Robin pardoned before sunset, turning him into a symbol of unity for a frightened kingdom. The witnesses will be silenced, records burned, survivors scattered. A useful legend is worth more to powerful men than an inconvenient truth. The gates shudder beneath the first strike. Marion orders everyone into the tunnels. Robin refuses. Running would preserve the lie. She grabs his coat and tells him confession means nothing if he dies before speaking. Another impact shakes dust from the arch. John draws his sword, though his hand barely closes around the hilt. There is a chapel on the ridge, he says. Its bell carries to 3 villages. If Robin speaks there, people will hear. Marion looks toward the steep path beyond the wall. Open ground, no cover. The king's riders will see them immediately. That is the point, Robin says. The priory erupts into motion. Survivors arm themselves with farming blades, old bows, broken spears, not soldiers. People who have already lost too much. Marion leads Thomas toward the tunnels, but the boy tears free and runs to John. For one breath, father and son stare at each other across the courtyard. John reaches for him, then stops, afraid he no longer has the right. Thomas closes the distance and presses his forehead against John's chest. Come back, he whispers. John's face collapses. He holds the boy as if the world has narrowed to that single fragile body. The gate begins to split. Robin strings his bow. Marion steps beside him with a short blade in each hand. He looks at her, searching for the woman who once washed blood from his face. She is still there, somewhere beneath the scars and anger. But she is not waiting to forgive him. He finally understands that love does not survive by pretending wounds never happened. Sometimes it survives by forcing them into the light. The gates burst inward. Royal soldiers flood the courtyard. Robin's first arrow drops the commander's horse, not the commander. The animal crashes, blocking the entrance. Marion moves next, fast, precise, cutting straps and wrists rather than throats. John roars and charges into the gap. The survivors follow. Metal screams. Mud turns red. Robin fires until his fingers split, choosing each shot carefully. Knees, shoulders, hands. For the first time in his life, every arrow is meant to stop a man without ending him. Then the commander rises from beneath his fallen horse and aims a crossbow at Marion. Robin sees it too late. John does not. He throws himself between them. The bolt strikes deep into his chest. John staggers, looks down at the blood spreading across his coat, and gives Robin the same crooked smile he wore when they were boys. "Now," he whispers, "go tell them who we really were." John falls before Robin can catch him. For one terrible second, the battle disappears. No shouting, no steel, no rain. Robin sees only the boy he once pulled from beneath a dead horse, now an old man sinking into the mud with a crossbow bolt buried beside his heart. He drops to his knees and presses both hands against the wound. Blood pushes through his fingers, hot and relentless. John tries to speak, but each breath breaks apart inside his chest. Around them, Marion and the survivors hold the courtyard by inches. They cannot hold it for long. "Stay with me," Robin says. John almost laughs. "You never listened before." Another wave of soldiers crashes through the gate. Marion shouts toward the ridge. "Go." Robin refuses to move. John grips his wrist with surprising strength. "Thomas cannot spend his life wondering whether I died a coward." His voice is barely sound now. "Tell him I was afraid. Tell him I did it anyway." Robin looks toward the tunnels, where Thomas is being dragged to safety. The boy twists against the healers, screaming for the only father he has ever known. John hears him. His eyes close. Then Robin stands. Something inside him wants to kill every man in the courtyard. The old instinct rises, sharp and familiar. One arrow through the commander's throat. Another into the soldier beside him. Blood would be easy. Blood has always been easy. Robin lifts his bow, draws, and aims. He fires at the priory bell rope. The arrow cuts it cleanly. The great iron bell drops from its frame and smashes into the stones between the soldiers. Men scatter. Horses rear. Marion sees the opening and drives the survivors toward the ridge path. Robin carries John across his shoulders while arrows tear through the air around them. One grazes his leg. Another punches through his coat. He keeps climbing. Every step burns. Every breath tastes of rust. Behind him, the priory doors collapse beneath royal boots. They reach the chapel as the sun breaks through the clouds. The building has no roof, only 4 cracked walls and a bell tower leaning over the valley. Below, villagers emerge from fields and doorways drawn by the violence. More gather along the road. Robin lowers John beside the altar. Marion closes both hands around the bolt but does not pull it free. Her eyes tell Robin what her mouth cannot. John has minutes, perhaps less. The commander reaches the chapel with 12 soldiers. His face is swollen, his armor bent, but the proclamation remains sealed in his hand. He orders Robin to kneel before the king's mercy. In return, every crime will be erased. The survivors will be spared. Robin's name will belong to England forever. Robin looks at the crowd below. For most of his life, he believed a name could save him. Robin Hood, outlaw, hero, devil. Each one was easier to carry than the truth. He climbs the broken steps to the bell tower and turns toward the valley. His voice shakes at first, but the stone carries it. He tells them about the robberies that fed no one, the prisoners he executed after they surrendered. The homes burned because fear made obedience faster. He speaks John's name and his own. He tells them heroes did not live in Sherwood, only frightened men with weapons, praised by people who never saw the graves. The commander raises his crossbow. Marion throws a blade. It strikes his hand, but the bolt releases. Robin hears it. John moves first. With the last of his strength, he pushes himself upright and takes the bolt through the back. His body jerks. The crowd gasps. Robin reaches him before he hits the ground. John's breathing is gone. Thomas arrives from the tunnel path moments later and sees Robin holding him. The boy makes no sound. He walks forward, kneels, and places the black wolf pendant against John's chest. Then he looks up at Robin. "Finish it," he says. Robin rises. The soldiers hesitate now. Hundreds of villagers stand below, listening. Marion forces the commander to his knees. The sealed pardon lies in the dirt between them. Robin picks it up, breaks the king's seal, and holds the parchment over a torch. Flame curls around his name. Cheers begin in the valley, but they stop when a single rider appears on the far ridge, carrying Gisborne's banner. The crippled man Robin believed hidden inside the priory has escaped, and tied behind his saddle is the one witness who can destroy everything Robin just confessed. The rider reaches the ridge before anyone can stop him. Gisborne sits crooked in the saddle, one leg bound in iron braces, his face carved hollow by years of pain. Behind him hangs an old priest, wrists tied, mouth bloodied. Marion recognizes him first. Brother Alden, the royal scribe who recorded every order during Robin's final campaign. If Alden speaks, the crown can claim Robin acted under command, that every village burned and every prisoner killed was part of a lawful war. Robin's confession will become another legend. Not a murderer telling the truth, but a loyal soldier sacrificed by powerful men. Gisborne turns his horse toward the forest. Robin follows. Marion catches his arm. This is what he wants. Robin looks back at John's body, at Thomas kneeling beside him, and gently pulls free. No, he wants the man I used to be. He takes one arrow from the mud and runs. His wounded leg nearly folds beneath him. But he keeps moving through the trees, following broken branches and dark drops of blood. The chase leads to an abandoned stone bridge above a flooded gorge, where Gisborne waits with Alden kneeling before him. For 20 years, Gisborne has lived for this moment. He tells Robin the king never feared the outlaw. The king needed him. Robin's raids weakened troublesome lords, frightened villages into obedience, and gave hungry people a hero harmless enough to worship. Gisborne was sent to guide the violence, then erase the evidence. When Robin's conscience finally broke, the crown buried him beneath songs. "You were never free," Gisborne says. "You were a weapon that believed it had a soul." Robin lowers his bow. The words should destroy him. Instead, they feel strangely small. The crown used him. John lied to him. Marion hid from him. None of it changes the hands he remembers around dying throats. None of it returns the dead. He tells Gisborne that blame can be divided, but guilt cannot be escaped. Gisborne smiles and presses a knife beneath Alden's chin. "Then die guilty." He charges. Robin fires once. The arrow does not strike Gisborne. It cuts Alden's ropes. The priest falls aside as Gisborne's horse crashes into Robin, throwing them both against the bridge wall. The bow vanishes into the gorge. Now there are only fists, stone, and old hatred. Gisborne drives the knife into Robin's side. Robin breaks his wrist. Bones crack. Gisborne screams, then laughs because the blade remains buried deep. Robin could kill him. He almost does. Then Thomas's voice returns in his memory. Does the terrible act ever become smaller? Robin releases him. Gisborne stares, confused. Mercy is the one wound he never prepared for. He lunges again, but his iron brace slips on the wet stone. Marion reaches the bridge as Gisborne falls backward over the broken edge. Robin catches his wrist. For a moment, enemy and outlaw hang between life and the roaring water below. Gisborne looks up. "Save me, and they will call you a hero." Robin's grip weakens. "No," he says. "They will call me a man who tried." The leather around Gisborne's wrist tears. He disappears into the flood. By the time Robin returns to the chapel, blood has soaked through his coat. Alden walks beside him and tells the villagers everything. The royal orders, the false pardons, the songs purchased with stolen coin. No one cheers. That is the first honest gift they give Robin. Thomas waits beside John. Robin kneels and places John's sword in the boy's hands, but Thomas refuses it. He takes John's farming knife instead, a tool for bread, rope, and soil, not war. Marion watches, tears sliding silently across her scars. Robin survives until sunset. He sits beneath the ruined bell tower with Marion beside him. He asks whether she ever loved the man in the songs. She rests her head against his shoulder. There was never a man in the songs. His breath catches. "And me?" Marion holds his hand as it grows cold. "I loved you enough to tell the truth." Below them, villagers tear the royal proclamation into pieces. Thomas carries John home. Alden begins writing new names. Not kings, not heroes, but every person the legend buried. Robin's final breath leaves as evening settles over the valley. Years later, the songs remain. Songs always do. But in one small village, children hear a different ending. Robin Hood did not die a hero, and he did not die a monster. He died without hiding, and for the first time in his life, the truth asked nothing more from him. Michael Sarnoski does not begin with Robin Hood's greatest victory. He begins with the bill coming due. In the death of Robin Hood, the legendary outlaw is no longer the smiling champion of Sherwood Forest, forever young and morally spotless. He is an aging, gravely wounded man forced to confront what his legend carefully erased: the bodies, the brutality, and the possibility that heroism was simply a flattering name for violence. That reversal is the film's central creative gamble. Sarnoski takes one of popular culture's most comforting folk heroes and asks a deeply uncomfortable question. What happens when the myth survives, but the man underneath it can no longer live with himself? That question fits perfectly within Sarnoski's young but unusually consistent career. His breakthrough film, Pig, appeared to be a revenge thriller before quietly transforming into a meditation on grief, memory, and the emotional cost of refusing to let go. A Quiet Place. Day One carried the machinery of a studio monster movie, yet Sarnoski treated the alien invasion as background noise to a far more intimate confrontation with mortality. Across all three films, his protagonists seem emotionally dead before the story even begins. They are not fighting to conquer the world. They are trying to decide whether one final human connection can make their remaining time meaningful. The origin of this particular project reaches back to Sarnoski's childhood. After a canoe journey with his father, a neighbor named Harvey gave him an old Robin Hood book that had been read during the 1940s. Sarnoski raced through the adventures, only to reach a final chapter in which the seemingly immortal outlaw died quietly in a church bedchamber. No glorious battlefield, no triumphant last stand, just a famous man becoming painfully human. That contradiction stayed with him. How could a figure built to live forever simply fade away? Decades later, that childhood confusion became the emotional engine of the film. Sarnoski's answer is not to destroy the Robin Hood legend for the pleasure of being cynical. The more interesting move is that he separates the inspirational power of the story from the moral reality of the person. A myth can encourage courage, rebellion, and generosity even when the individual behind it was violent, selfish, or cruel. That tension gives the movie real bite. Robin is not merely exposed as a fraud, nor is he conveniently forgiven because audiences recognize his name. Sarnoski traps him between reputation and memory, between the heroic song sung by strangers and the private truth he carries inside his damaged body. This is why the film's violence feels central to the director's vision rather than decorative. Sarnoski has said he could not soften the brutality because death and transcendence occupy the same natural world. Mud, blood, trees, fire, and human flesh belong to one physical landscape. Yet he was equally determined to preserve stillness, the silence after violence, the patience of watching someone breathe, and the strange calm that can arrive when escape is no longer possible. The result is less a conventional medieval adventure than a spiritual reckoning wearing the skin of one. Violence supplies the wound. Stillness forces Robin to look at it. Hugh Jackman's wounded outlaw becomes the ideal vessel for that approach, surrounded by Jodie Comer, Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, and Noah Jupe. A24 acquired the American distribution rights after the project became one of the prominent packages offered around Cannes in 2024, eventually releasing the film in the United States on June 19, 2026. That partnership makes creative sense. A safer studio version might have pushed the material toward battles, recognizable iconography, and franchise-ready mythology. Sarnoski instead delivers an R-rated character study about guilt and salvation, hardly the obvious commercial direction for one of folklore's most adaptable heroes. And here is what makes his interpretation work. He treats Robin Hood's death not as an ending, but as a lens. Once death enters the frame, every past adventure changes meaning. The cheerful outlaw songs begin to sound like propaganda. The famous acts of rebellion become morally unstable. Even the image of an arrow flying through the forest loses its romantic purity when the film insists that an arrow eventually enters somebody's body. Sarnoski strips away the clean distance of legend. The forest is no longer a playground, violence is no longer choreography, and redemption is no longer guaranteed simply because the protagonist used to be somebody's hero. That is the architecture of the death of Robin Hood, a childhood fascination transformed into an autopsy of heroism. Sarnoski approaches the legend with affection, but not obedience. He understands why people need Robin Hood while remaining suspicious of the lies required to preserve him. The film therefore stands as a natural continuation of the director's obsession with wounded people facing the boundary between death and grace. But vision alone cannot turn an ancient ballad into a functioning drama. For that, Sarnoski needed to reconstruct the legend at the level of story, deciding what to preserve, what to reinvent, and what Robin himself had spent a lifetime trying to forget. But a director's vision is only as strong as the story carrying it, and Michael Sarnoski's screenplay begins by making one ruthless decision. It refuses to tell Robin Hood's greatest adventures. The rebellion, the robberies, and the formation of the Merry Men already belong to folklore. Sarnoski enters after the songs have been written, when the hero has outlived the version of himself that everyone else remembers. He wrote the screenplay before beginning work on A Quiet Place. Day one, treating it as a more personal project he could preserve while making a major studio film. The script became his bridge between the intimacy of Pig and the larger scale he learned to command inside the Quiet Place franchise. The foundation comes from the early Robin Hood ballads, particularly the tradition surrounding the outlaw's death, rather than from the later mythology most films recycle. King Richard, the Crusades, and much of the familiar political framework were attached to Robin centuries after the earliest stories. Those original tales could be shockingly cruel, less polished national legend, more medieval campfire nightmare. Sarnoski recognized an opportunity hiding inside that brutality. Instead of modernizing Robin by giving him fashionable dialogue or contemporary politics, he asks what a real person shaped by such violence might become after surviving long enough to remember everything. That changes the screenplay's basic dramatic question. Most Robin Hood stories ask whether the outlaw can defeat tyranny. This one asks whether a violent man can become anything other than the story he has spent his life performing. Robin initially appears as someone for whom murder has become instinctive, not heroic. After suffering devastating injuries, he reaches an isolated priory under the name Randolph, physically separated from the legend and surrounded by people who do not immediately treat him as England's celebrated rebel. The disguise is more than a plot device. For perhaps the first time, Robin can exist without being required to act like Robin Hood. Sarnoski structures the film almost like a moral funnel. The opening stretches across harsh landscapes and erupts into grotesque battle, presenting the life Robin understands: attack, survive, move on. Then the frame of the story tightens around the priory. Action gives way to recovery. Recovery becomes conversation. Conversation becomes judgment. The shift is deliberately jarring because the screenplay is draining Robin of the tools that once gave him power. A bow cannot heal guilt. Physical toughness cannot answer a spiritual question. Once he is confined to a bed and dependent on strangers, England's most dangerous outlaw must attempt something far more difficult than combat. He must remain still. Sister Brigid is crucial because she is not written as another version of Maid Marian. Sarnoski avoids the predictable romance in which the love of a good woman magically redeems a damaged man. Brigid operates instead as Robin's ideological opposite and uncomfortable mirror. He once used stories to recruit followers, justify bloodshed, and transform himself into a symbol. She uses ritual, community, and spiritual storytelling to help wounded people endure. Sarnoski described Robin and Brigid as figures whose influence can resemble that of rival cult leaders. Both understand how narratives shape behavior, but they direct that power toward radically different ends. That conflict turns storytelling itself into the screenplay's hidden weapon. Robin distrusts Brigid because he recognizes her methods. He has seen how a compelling narrative can make frightened people obey, suffer, or kill. Yet his gradual realization is that stories do not have to manipulate people toward violence. They can offer belonging and healing as well. That is a more interesting argument than simply declaring legends false. Sarnoski understands that mythology is morally neutral. A story can conceal atrocities, but it can also help somebody survive them. The question is never whether people will create legends. They will. The question is what those legends ask their listeners to become. The screenplay also surrounds Robin with characters who embody different consequences of violence. Little John carries the seductive loyalty of Robin's old life. Margaret, John's young daughter, represents the innocence inherited by the next generation. A blinded young man seeks vengeance, while the Priory's inhabitants offer Robin the possibility of community without conquest. These encounters give the middle stretch an episodic quality, almost like stations in a spiritual trial. Each person forces Robin to face a different version of himself: leader, killer, protector, manipulator, coward. The plot slows, but the moral pressure keeps tightening. That approach creates the screenplay's greatest strength and its clearest vulnerability. By withholding extensive history, Sarnoski allows Robin's guilt to feel ancient and almost mythic. We sense a lifetime of damage without receiving a neat catalog of crimes. But the absence can also become emotional fog. Some exchanges carry enormous weight. Others feel like fragments from a longer biography the audience was never allowed to see. Critics divided over whether this ambiguity created mystery or simply left Robin underwritten. The film asks viewers to mourn the corruption of a legend while intentionally denying them the comforting version of that legend first. Still, the script's ambition is undeniable. It transforms a familiar adventure into a chamber drama about identity, narrative power, and the frightening possibility that redemption may require more than regret. Robin cannot rewrite the past. He can only decide whether his final action will repeat it. And because so much of that conflict lives beneath the dialogue, in silence, hesitation, and faces carrying years the screenplay never directly describes, the entire film depends upon actors capable of making an unwritten lifetime visible. That burden falls first on Hugh Jackman, and his casting works because it weaponizes familiarity. Audiences already know him as a charismatic entertainer, a disciplined action star, and, through Wolverine, a performer capable of carrying decades of violence in his posture. Michael Sarnoski needed Robin to arrive with an existing heroic aura before the film could begin dismantling it. Jackman supplies that aura automatically. We see the broad shoulders, the commanding voice, and the face associated with endurance. Then the costume, makeup, and physical exhaustion corrupt the image. Robin Hood has not disappeared. He has decayed in public, and casting Jackman makes that decay feel almost personal. Jackman and Jodie Comer were attached when the project entered the Cannes market in May 2024, establishing the film around two actors rather than around spectacle or franchise recognition. Bill Skarsgård, Murray Bartlett, and Noah Jupe joined the ensemble in February 2025 as production began in Ireland. The available coverage does not describe a traditional audition tournament or reveal famous alternate choices. That absence matters. This cast does not feel designed through stunt announcements. It feels assembled by emotional function. Jackman carries corrupted legend, Comer carries moral scrutiny, Skarsgård carries loyalty, Bartlett carries mortality, and Jupe carries consequence. Comer is an especially sharp choice for Sister Brigid because she can project compassion without becoming passive. Her work in Killing Eve, Help, The Last Duel, and Prima Facie repeatedly depends on rapid emotional calculation, watching, assessing, withholding, and then striking with absolute precision. Brigid requires that same alertness. She cannot simply nurse Robin back to health. She must study the man beneath the infection of his legend. Comer described her role as partly witnessing Robin's movement from hardened guilt toward something softer, which captures why her casting works. She is not positioned as his reward. She is the gaze he cannot escape. The contrast between Comer and Jackman also avoids the obvious chemistry of a conventional romantic pairing. Their connection is built around resistance. He embodies physical force and a lifetime spent turning action into authority. She possesses a quieter form of control, grounded in patience, community, and an ability to remain emotionally present when he wants to retreat behind anger. Even their first encounter as performers carried a useful imbalance. Comer said she initially failed to recognize Jackman once he had been transformed by the heavy beard, mud, and aging makeup. She heard his voice before she identified the man. That is practically the movie's thesis. The legend remains audible even when the familiar face has vanished. Bill Skarsgård brings a different kind of expectation to Little John. His screen persona often carries uncertainty. Elegance interrupted by menace, tenderness shadowed by something dangerous. Casting him beside Jackman immediately prevents Little John from becoming the cheerful, oversized companion found in lighter adaptations. This is a man who has survived alongside Robin, which means loyalty cannot be separated from complicity. Skarsgård's relative youth creates another productive tension. He looks like someone who might still have a future, yet his bond with Robin keeps pulling him toward an inherited cycle of bloodshed. The choice turns friendship into a trap disguised as devotion. Murray Bartlett, meanwhile, plays the leper, a character almost entirely concealed beneath rags and physical deterioration. Bartlett said that only his eyes remained visible for much of the film, to the point that crew members sometimes failed to recognize him away from costume. That concealment makes his casting quietly daring. Bartlett is an actor whose warmth usually arrives through openness, the relaxed smile, the inviting voice, the sense that emotion is about to surface. Sarnoski removes most of those tools. What remains is presence. The leper becomes another possible image of Robin's future, a body fading while the need for dignity remains painfully alive. Noah Jupe serves the ensemble differently. Having played emotionally exposed children and adolescents in A Quiet Place, Honey Boy, and Ford v. Ferrari, he carries vulnerability without innocence becoming sentimental. Here, his young, wounded figure seeks revenge for violence tied to Robin's past. The casting closes the generational circle. Jackman represents the man who created the legend. Jupe represents someone forced to live inside its consequences. Faith Delaney's Little Margaret extends that idea from another direction, embodying the young lives that can either inherit the old violence or imagine something beyond it. Taken together, the ensemble is built around faces that can hold contradiction. Jackman appears heroic while playing moral collapse. Comer appears compassionate without surrendering authority. Skarsgård makes loyalty threatening. Bartlett finds humanity beneath near-total concealment, while Jupe turns youth into accusation. The casting does not merely populate Sarnoski's screenplay. It gives each of its ideas a human body. And once those bodies begin sharing the frame, the real test arrives. Not whether these actors look right for the legend, but whether they can make its grief, violence, and buried tenderness feel lived rather than written. Hugh Jackman's defining performance choice arrives before Robin says anything meaningful. He makes the body confess first. His shoulders remain powerful, but they no longer suggest effortless command. They look like supports keeping a ruined structure upright. His walk carries the stiffness of accumulated injuries, and his face seems permanently braced against either pain or memory. This is not simply Jackman revisiting the exhausted physicality of Logan. Wolverine still possessed an animal's instinct to survive. Robin often appears offended by his own survival, as though every additional breath extends a punishment he has already accepted. The transformation could easily have become cosmetic: gray hair, an enormous beard, layers of mud, and strategically applied scars. Jackman pushes beyond that surface. He plays Robin as a man who has spent so long performing toughness that he can no longer distinguish strength from emotional paralysis. His voice sits low and heavy, but the weight matters more than the volume. Each sentence feels dragged past defenses built over decades. When Robin rejects the heroic stories surrounding him, Jackman does not deliver the confession with theatrical shame. He sounds irritated. Shame would require vulnerability, and Robin initially treats vulnerability as another enemy to kill. That resistance makes the film's early violence essential to the performance. Jackman described one mud-soaked confrontation as the hardest sequence he had ever filmed, citing both its physical punishment and emotional intensity. You can feel that exhaustion on screen. The fight does not showcase an ageless star, proving he can still dominate action choreography. Bodies slip, breath shortens, survival becomes ugly and frighteningly intimate. Jackman's athleticism remains visible, but Michael Sarnoski turns it against him. Every powerful movement reminds us how efficiently this man learned to hurt others. The familiar action hero physique becomes evidence for the prosecution. Here is where Jackman earns the film. Once Robin is injured and placed under Sister Brigid's care, the performance contracts. Movement becomes limited, leaving Jackman dependent on tiny reactions. A glance held too long, a jaw tightening before an answer, anger arriving whenever kindness gets dangerously close. Robin can endure physical agony because pain follows rules he understands. Compassion terrifies him. It threatens the identity he has constructed around being irredeemable, and Jackman lets us see the panic beneath his hostility without softening the character into a misunderstood saint. Critics repeatedly singled out his haunted, taciturn presence, with comparisons to Logan emerging naturally rather than through imitation. Jodie Comer works in the opposite direction. Jackman fills silence with resistance. Comer fills it with attention. Her sister Brigid watches Robin closely enough to make observation feel confrontational. She rarely needs to overpower him vocally, because her stillness denies him an easy target. Comer's face stays open without becoming readable, allowing compassion, suspicion, and spiritual certainty to coexist. That ambiguity protects Brigid from becoming the saintly woman whose goodness exists only to rescue a damaged man. She cares for Robin, but she also studies him. Every act of tenderness carries a question: what will he do with the mercy he has been given? Their campfire conversation captures the film's acting strategy in miniature. Jackman sits within the defensive shell of Randolph, the temporary identity Robin uses while hiding from his legend. Comer's Brigid does not tear that disguise away through dramatic accusation. She lets the silence around it become unbearable. Their rhythm is built from pauses rather than verbal fireworks. One character avoiding exposure, the other refusing to reward avoidance. A24's scene breakdown with Jackman, Comer and Sarnoski emphasizes how carefully that exchange was constructed, yet it feels discovered in the moment. The technique disappears. What remains is two exhausted people testing whether honesty can exist without punishment. Comer's limitation is not her performance, but the material surrounding it. Some critics felt Brigid remained too thinly written, burdened with philosophical dialogue without enough personal history to give every speech equal force. That criticism lands. Comer can imply an interior life through concentration and restraint, but implication cannot replace missing dramatic architecture forever. Even so, she prevents Brigid from becoming merely symbolic. Her warmth has discipline. Her faith contains strategy. When she looks at Robin, she appears to see both the murderer and the frightened human being beneath him, and she refuses the comforting lie that recognizing the second erases the first. Together, Jackman and Comer create a relationship based not on romance but on moral pressure. He represents a body shaped by violence. She represents the possibility that care can be equally forceful. Their chemistry comes from refusal. Robin refuses forgiveness. Brigid refuses his belief that damnation is the only honest verdict. Jackman gives the film its wound. Comer gives that wound someone capable of looking directly into it. Yet their performances do not exist in isolation. Around them stands an ensemble carrying loyalty, vengeance, disease, and inherited trauma, each supporting character reflecting another consequence of the legend Robin created. Yet even the strongest confrontation between Robin and Brigid would feel abstract without an ensemble, showing what Robin's choices have done to other people. Michael Sarnoski does not surround his outlaw with the familiar merry men, each waiting for an applause-generating entrance. He gives him fractured reflections instead. Little John embodies devotion corrupted by violence. The leper represents peace found after social death. Arthur carries the physical evidence of Robin's cruelty, while little Margaret becomes a fragile chance to prevent that cruelty from reaching another generation. Together, they turn Robin's guilt from an internal mood into something visible, breathing, and impossible to dismiss. Bill Skarsgård's Little John is the most volatile presence among them. The character is not a jovial giant or dependable comic companion. He appears emotionally stranded inside the violent world Robin created for him. Skarsgård described John as someone Robin effectively adopted, suggesting a bond whose missing history can still be felt in their behavior. That history matters because John's loyalty resembles the devotion of a wounded child toward the man who gave his life direction. He does not merely follow Robin. He has built his entire identity around him. Remove the legend, and John has almost nothing left. Skarsgård plays that dependency without making John simple. There is tenderness between the two men, but it arrives contaminated by habit, fear, and shared bloodshed. John's instinct is always to continue, rescue the family, punish the enemy, answer violence with more violence. Robin may have begun questioning that cycle, but John still treats it as the natural order of existence. Watch how Skarsgård's physical openness changes around Jackman. He can appear loose and almost boyish for a moment, then suddenly harden when the possibility of separation enters the scene. John is not defending an ideology. He is defending the only relationship that has ever made him feel secure. Faith Delaney's Little Margaret gives that relationship its human stakes. As Little John's daughter, she is both family and inheritance, the innocent life Robin and John claim their violence was meant to protect. Delaney wisely avoids playing her as a glowing symbol of purity. Margaret watches these adults carefully. She absorbs fear before she understands its source and senses that the men protecting her are also capable of bringing danger into every place they enter. Robin's growing concern for her creates one of the film's few movements toward hope. Saving Margaret cannot erase what he has done, but it may stop one old pattern from reproducing itself. Noah Jupe's Arthur, also identified as Godwin in cast listings, stands on the opposite side of that equation. His maimed, bandaged face carries evidence of a recent encounter with Robin and John, turning him into the consequence that refuses to remain buried. Jupe's youth sharpens the accusation. Robin's victims are not distant soldiers in forgotten battles. They are young people whose futures have been physically rewritten by his survival. Jupe does not need extravagant rage. The damaged face does the shouting, while his stillness suggests someone holding himself together through the promise of revenge. He becomes what Robin once made John. Another wounded young man offered violence as identity. Then Murray Bartlett enters and quietly steals emotional ground from everyone. Almost completely hidden beneath rags and prosthetic deterioration, his leper has been excluded from ordinary society but has not surrendered his capacity for tenderness. Bartlett said the disguise was so complete that crew members sometimes failed to recognize him, leaving only his eyes available as a familiar expressive tool. That restriction becomes the performance's strength. The eyes remain curious, amused, and painfully alive. Where Robin treats his damaged body as proof that life has become worthless, the leper treats continued existence as a responsibility toward the community around him. His scenes with Robin are gentle without becoming sentimental. The leper teaches him about the Priory's routines, its fruit, and the practical work required to maintain a place where damaged people can live together. No grand quest. No ballad. Just care, repeated daily. Bartlett's warmth changes Jackman's performance because Robin cannot dismiss him as naive. This is another man intimately acquainted with suffering. Yet he has reached a conclusion Robin finds almost insulting. Pain does not excuse cruelty. Their companionship offers a glimpse of the life Robin might have lived had he learned that usefulness could mean cultivation rather than conquest. The ensemble does occasionally expose the screenplay's thinness. Several supporting figures operate more powerfully as moral ideas than as fully explored people, and the film's solemn dialogue sometimes makes them sound as though they are delivering variations of the same philosophical argument. But the actors resist that uniformity. Skarsgård brings desperation, Jupe brings accusation, Delaney brings guarded possibility, Bartlett brings humor and grace. They do not simply orbit Jackman, they pull Robin in competing directions, making redemption feel less like a private revelation than a decision with consequences for everyone nearby. That balance is the ensemble's real achievement. Robin is surrounded by the family he failed, the enemy he created, the companion he corrupted, and the stranger who offers another way to live. Each relationship strips away another layer of heroic fantasy. Yet these performances gain much of their force from the world containing them: the mud-caked clothing, the isolated sanctuary, the diseased bodies, and the landscapes that make human beings look temporary. The actors carry the moral history, but the production design gives that history texture. The production design does not invite us into medieval England. It abandons us there. Under production designer David Lee, the world of The Death of Robin Hood feels less constructed than excavated. Stone, timber, wet earth, and human remains pressed into the same brutal ecosystem. Nothing appears polished for the camera. Walls sweat. Clothing hangs heavily from bodies. Paths disappear into mud. Even places of refuge look as though they could be reclaimed by the landscape overnight. That physical instability matters because Robin is confronting the collapse of something equally fragile, the heroic identity he treated as permanent. Lee's sets and locations make impermanence visible in every cracked surface. Michael Sarnoski wanted the film to feel practical rather than digitally manufactured, allowing real locations to retain their scale and irregularity. Production was based partly at Belfast Harbour Studios and spread across rugged terrain in Ireland and Northern Ireland during a 30-day shoot. The Rock of Cashel supplied much of the priory environment, while locations such as the Giant's Causeway helped place the characters inside landscapes already burdened with myth. Sarnoski's crew did not smooth those places into generic medieval scenery. They let weather, stone, and distance dominate the frame. Human beings look temporary here. The land appears ancient enough to have forgotten every war fought across it. That is the key distinction between this film and the bright, storybook geography associated with many Robin Hood adaptations. Sherwood Forest usually represents freedom, a green kingdom where authority loses its power and rebellion becomes adventure. Sarnoski's wilderness offers no such comfort. It is cold, exposed, and indifferent. Robin does not control the forest. He hides inside it like an injured animal. Sarnoski cited The Virgin Spring and Valhalla Rising as visual influences, both films in which spiritual longing exists beside shocking physical cruelty. The environment can be beautiful, but it never promises safety. Nature does not forgive Robin. It simply continues around him. The priory changes that visual language without becoming conventionally warm. Its stone chambers are severe, its rooms functional, and its comforts limited. Yet compared with Robin's cave-like isolation, the space feels almost radical because it has been shaped for communal survival. Beds are maintained. Food is cultivated. The wounded are given places to rest. Production design turns care into architecture. Robin's old world was built around defensible positions and escape routes. Brigid's world is built around people remaining together. The difference is quiet but profound. One space asks how long a man can survive alone. The other asks whether survival has meaning without responsibility towards someone else. Even the film's most visually dramatic construction was achieved through practical design. For a sequence involving a burning hut, the art and special effects departments created a structure capable of burning for roughly 15 minutes at a time. Metal sections were built into it, so pieces could be removed safely as the fire expanded. That engineering does more than produce convincing flames. Real fire changes how actors move, how smoke occupies the air, and how danger registers on the face. The scene carries weight because the environment is genuinely transforming around the performers rather than waiting to be completed in post-production. Costume designer Lorna Mugen follows the same philosophy of degradation. The clothes do not merely identify class or occupation. They show what repeated exposure does to fabric and flesh. Layers appear coarse, stained, and repaired rather than attractively distressed. Robin's clothing almost fuses with the earth, reducing the famous outlaw to a mass of leather, wool, mud, and old blood. The traditional green costume has vanished because this Robin no longer needs to advertise himself as a symbol. He dresses to endure cold, conceal his body, and keep moving. Heroic iconography has been replaced by survival equipment. Robin's hair and makeup extend that visual argument. Jackman worked with hairstylist Sean Flanagan and makeup artist Pamela Westmore to create the long gray-white hair, enormous beard, and weathered skin that make him initially resemble what Sarnoski called an ogre living in a cave. Crucially, the look was designed to evolve. The same hair can hang wildly around his face, be tied back for battle, or acquire a faint elegance as Brigid's care begins returning him to human society. The transformation is not a glamorous makeover. It is a gradual act of recognition. Somewhere beneath the dirt, the body still belongs to a person. Brigid's appearance offers a restrained counterpoint. Her clothing belongs to the Priory's practical world, layered, durable, and free from decorative excess. Yet she never disappears into the environment the way Robin does. Her silhouette remains controlled, reflecting a character whose authority comes from discipline rather than intimidation. Little John's darker, heavier garments carry the old life forward, while the leper's near-total covering reduces Murray Bartlett to a pair of visible eyes. Costume becomes social position. Robin hides from his name, John carries its violence. Brigid stands within a community, and the leper has been physically erased by the world outside it. The design occasionally risks becoming oppressively uniform. Mud, stone, gray cloth, and diseased bodies dominate so thoroughly that some viewers may feel the film is announcing its seriousness in every frame. But that severity has purpose. Sarnoski is not attempting a complete historical panorama of 13th century life. He is constructing a moral landscape around one dying man. Every location appears to ask the same question in a different form. Will Robin remain part of the wilderness that shaped his violence, or enter a fragile human space built around care? David Lee's production design makes that conflict tangible. The film begins in environments where bodies are buried, hunted, and burned, then gradually settles inside rooms where bodies are washed, fed, and mourned. Civilization is not represented by castles or royal power. It is represented by somebody preparing a bed for a stranger. And once this physical world has been established, cinematographer Pat Scola must decide how we are allowed to see it. When the landscape should overwhelm Robin, when the frame should imprison him, and when light should finally permit the man behind the legend to emerge. The production design gives Robin's guilt a physical world, but Pat Scola's cinematography decides how that guilt enters the audience's bloodstream. Scola had already photographed Michael Sarnoski's Pig in a Quiet Place. Day one, yet this third collaboration demanded a different visual language. Their solution was not simply to make medieval England look dark and expensive. They divided the film into two competing ways of seeing Robin. First, as a legendary figure moving through an enormous, violent world, then as a wounded man whose face can no longer hide inside the landscape. The camera does not merely record his transformation. It physically changes its shape around him. For the first movement, Scola photographs Robin in the wide 2.39:1 anamorphic format. That stretched, panoramic frame traditionally associated with cinematic spectacle. He used Ultra Panatar 2 lenses on Aricam LT 35mm cameras, giving the wilderness enough horizontal space to dwarf the people crossing it. Yet the width does not make Robin's life feel adventurous. It makes it feel exposed. Empty land surrounds campfires, combatants emerge from darkness, and human bodies become temporary interruptions in fields of mud and stone. This is Robin the myth, but Scola presents myth as isolation rather than grandeur. The frame is wide enough for a legend and almost too wide for a man. Then Robin reaches the Priory, and the image contracts into the taller 1:6:1 ratio. The change is easy to feel even when viewers do not consciously identify it. Horizontal spectacle gives way to vertical intimacy. Faces occupy more of the composition. Bodies lying in beds no longer disappear beneath architecture. According to Scola, the taller frame also prevented the Priory's small rooms from becoming visually cramped, but its emotional function is even more important. The film stops looking outward at Robin Hood and starts looking inward at Robin. The legendary outlaw loses the protective distance of widescreen. There is suddenly nowhere for Jackman's eyes, wounds, or moments of fear to hide. That transition is the film's most intelligent technical choice because it expresses character without dialogue. The opening frame tells us that Robin belongs to history, landscape, and violence. The later frame insists that he belongs to a body. Think about the difference. A wide shot can turn a man walking across a ridge into an icon. A taller close-up turns the same man into skin, breath, and hesitation. Sarnoski's screenplay spends much of its second half debating whether Robin can escape his legend, while Scola quietly accomplishes that escape through composition. The format itself strips away the ballad. What remains is a dying face. Scola and Sarnoski chose 35mm film from the beginning, partly to distinguish the picture from digitally captured medieval films and television series. The movie was shot in 3-perforation 35mm using Kodak Vision 3 250D for daylight, 500T for night and low light material, and the newer Verita 200D stock for selected final scenes. Cinelab processed the negative and produced 4K scans. Those specifications matter because the image carries movement inside it. Grain flickers across fog, skin, and stone, preventing the world from feeling polished or frozen. Digital photography can imitate that texture, but here the physical instability of film stock complements a story about memory becoming unreliable and a body beginning to fail. The visual references were paintings more than movies. N.C. Wyeth's 1917 painting, The Passing of Robin Hood, appeared on the screenplay's cover and guided the filmmakers toward intimate arrangements of bodies, worn fabrics, stone walls, and soft window light. Scola also studied Vermeer, Caravaggio, and Goya. You can feel those influences in the tension between darkness and illumination. Caravaggio's chiaroscuro, the violent contrast between light and shadow, becomes ideal for a character suspended between confession and concealment. Vermeer's quieter domestic light shapes the Priory, where care enters through windows and settles gently across faces. Goya lingers over the brutality, where human beings seem capable of becoming animals without warning. Color follows the same emotional progression. Robin's early world is drained toward bleak grays, mirroring his physical exhaustion and moral numbness. At the Priory, warmer skin tones and softer colors gradually return as Brigid and the community pull him back into human contact. The warmth never becomes lush enough to promise an easy redemption. It arrives cautiously, like circulation returning to a frozen hand. During the final reckoning, Grynest begins reclaiming the image. Robin may change, but the film refuses to pretend that healing erases consequence. Scola's palette does not reward him with visual purity. It allows warmth, then asks whether he deserves to carry any of it with him. Camera movement remains restrained through much of this process. Scola described the camera as inquisitive rather than energetic, observing Robin and Brigid as they attempt to understand one another. Most of the production used a single camera, preserving concentration between performers instead of covering every scene from multiple angles. Handheld operation was reserved for selected moments, while an Aeroflex 235 supported traveling shots using Steadicam and Trinity stabilizers. This discipline keeps movement meaningful. When the camera shifts, it feels as though the film has noticed something. When it remains still, the actors must endure the frame without editorial rescue. The most expressive departure occurs as the injured Robin is transported to the Priory. Scola used a Lensbaby Suite 35 and even shot through a water-filled glass-preserving jar to produce distorted, impressionistic imagery. Focus bends. Space loses stability. The world appears to liquefy around a man hovering between consciousness and death. It is a rare moment when the cinematography stops observing Robin and enters his damaged perception. The technique could have felt like visual decoration, but its placement gives it purpose. The legend is being broken apart, and Robin cannot yet see what kind of person will emerge from the fragments. Natural light completes the illusion. Exterior scenes frequently relied on available illumination, while interiors motivated their light through windows, candles, and fire. Real flames were used whenever practical, with hidden electrical sources recreating their movement when actor safety or exposure required greater control. Even digitally captured drone footage was printed onto film stocks to integrate it with the 35mm texture. The result is not realism in the documentary sense. It is a carefully engineered roughness that feels discovered rather than arranged. Scola makes beauty inseparable from discomfort. Fog glows, fire dances, blood remains blood. The cinematography becomes the film's most coherent storyteller. Dialogue occasionally labors to explain Robin's guilt, but the image understands him immediately. Wide when he is hiding inside mythology, tall when he is forced into humanity, cold when he rejects connection, and briefly warm when grace becomes imaginable. Pat Scola does not photograph a heroic death. He photographs the shrinking distance between a legend and his mortal body. And while the camera guides our eyes through that reckoning, another element works beneath conscious thought: the groan of timber, the violence of steel, the weight of silence, and a musical score that must decide whether Robin's final days deserve mourning. What the camera exposes? The soundtrack makes impossible to escape. The death of Robin Hood does not sound like a heroic adventure stripped of its color. It sounds like a legend being buried. Wind crosses empty land. Fire snaps against silence. Steel enters flesh without the clean metallic punctuation of traditional action cinema. Michael Sarnoski and his audio team refuse to transform violence into rhythm. Every impact feels clumsy, wet, and final. The film's visual world may reduce Robin to a body, but its soundscape forces us to hear that body labor, breathing, choking, dragging itself through a life it no longer seems eager to preserve. The inspired choice was hiring Sheffield folk musician Jim Geddy, making his feature film scoring debut. Sarnoski approached him after hearing Wasteland, Geddy's 2025 album of brooding folk music shaped by images of social and environmental collapse. Geddy was not an established Hollywood composer waiting to supply familiar medieval grandeur. He came from a tradition in which landscape, labor, and inherited stories already carry political and emotional weight. That background makes him unusually suited to a film suspicious of polished folklore. His music does not arrive to certify Robin as a hero. It sounds as though it has been traveling through the earth long before he entered the story. Listen to the opening. Geddy's score does not rush toward bold brass, triumphant percussion, or a melody built for galloping horses. Voices and rough folk textures seem to rise from the landscape, sometimes mournful, sometimes accusatory. The effect is ancient without becoming ornamental. This is not medieval music arranged for a theme park banquet. It feels damaged, weather-beaten, and spiritually unsettled. Critics describe the score as moody, wailing, and folk-driven, qualities that mirror Robin's position between historical person and distorted legend. The music knows the ballad before the man does, and it appears far less interested in flattering him. The official album runs 14 tracks across approximately 48 minutes, and even its titles map Robin's moral journey. Farm Attack, Bold Peddler, Twa Corbies, Sister Brigid's Family, Elder Father Fight, and, inevitably, Robin's Death. One title carries particular thematic weight: Lamentations of Round Oak Waters, which incorporates words from poet John Clare. Geddy is therefore not merely underscoring individual scenes. He is connecting Sarnoski's revision to an older current of English folk memory. Songs, poems, and oral histories in which landscape witnesses human suffering long after official heroes and rulers have vanished. That connection becomes clearest whenever the score approaches the human voice. Singing in this film is never just musical decoration. It embodies the same storytelling power Robin distrusts. A song can turn a murderer into a champion before the truth has time to object. Yet Geddy's vocal passages rarely sound victorious. They resemble lament, warning, and communal remembrance. The distinction matters. Robinson once used stories to expand his authority, while the Priory uses them to bind damaged people together. The score moves between those possibilities. Music can spread the lie of heroism, but it can also preserve grief that history would rather clean away. The sound design around combat is even less forgiving. Arrows do not whistle elegantly toward chosen targets. They cut through space, followed by the blunt reaction of whatever receives them. Weapons scrape, bodies collide, and mud interferes with movement. The mix emphasizes exertion over choreography. Boots losing traction, men struggling for breath, fabric tightening around wounds. Heroic action usually creates distance between an audience and suffering through speed, music, and visual rhythm. Here, sound closes that distance. Violence becomes physical work, and the people performing it sound exhausted long before they fall. Inside the Priory, the sonic world contracts alongside Pat Scola's frame. The great outdoor winds recede, replaced by water, cloth, wooden floors, quiet voices, and the uncomfortable sounds of injured bodies sharing limited space. This is diegetic sound, audio originating within the story world, used not for realism alone but for moral contrast. Robin's wilderness life was filled with threat. Every distant noise could announce an attacker. Brigid's community produces another kind of alertness. A cough may require care. A footstep may mean someone bringing food. The same act of listening that once kept Robin alive must now teach him to notice other people. Silence becomes Brigid's strongest ally. Sarnoski allows conversations to continue after the dialogue appears finished, creating spaces Jackman and Comer must fill through breath and eye contact. Getty's score often avoids rescuing these moments with emotional instructions. No swelling melody tells us when Robin deserves sympathy. We must sit with him. That restraint can make the film feel punishingly slow, and viewers resistant to its solemnity may experience the quiet as emptiness. But at its best, silence functions like pressure inside a sealed room. Robin talks because remaining unheard becomes harder than confession. Supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer Lee Sullivan, working with re-recording mixer Paul Maines and the wider sound department, balances those intimate details against Getty's larger folk lament. The mix rarely lets atmosphere disappear completely beneath music. Wind remains present. Flames keep moving. Human voices retain cracks and rough edges. That balance prevents the score from romanticizing the images it accompanies. Even when the music reaches toward transcendence, the sound effects keep pulling Robin back into material reality. Damaged lungs, cold rooms, burning wood and blood that cannot be transformed into metaphor. Getty's score finally succeeds because it mourns without absolving. It recognizes the tragedy of a man discovering humanity too late, but it never restores the cheerful outlaw promised by centuries of retelling. The music sounds older than judgment and sadder than revenge. Combined with a soundscape built from weather, labor, and bodily vulnerability, it turns Robin's final passage into an acoustic struggle between the legend people sing and the truth he can still hear underneath it. Yet creating that bleak harmony required its own struggle. 30 days of location work, practical fire, punishing weather, and a production racing to capture myth before the landscape swallowed it. The most punishing element of the death of Robin Hood was not its scale. It was its compression. Michael Sarnoski shot the film on 35mm across rugged locations in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in only 30 days, attempting to combine the closeness of an independent drama with the physical scope he had learned to manage on A Quiet Place. Day 1. That meant there was little room for hesitation. Weather moved. Light vanished. Film stock kept rolling. A battle sequence, an intimate confession, and a practical effects set piece all had to belong to the same production rhythm. The urgency visible on screen was not manufactured later. It was built into the schedule. Production began around Belfast in early 2025, with the landscape functioning less like a backdrop than an unpredictable collaborator. Sarnoski and cinematographer Pat Scola worked at real historical and rural locations, often allowing the terrain to dictate composition rather than forcing every shot into a rigid pre-planned design. Sarnoski has said that he and Scola generally avoid extensive shot lists and do not rely on large numbers of takes. Shooting on film intensified that discipline. Everyone had to understand the purpose of the setup before the camera turned, creating what the director described as a shared sense of urgency and concentration. That approach produced one of the film's most charming behind-the-scenes discoveries on its final shooting day. While scouting the stone interiors around the Rock of Cashel, the filmmakers noticed a grassy hill beside a wall near the parking area. It offered exactly the balance they needed: open land, a fragment of ancient structure, and enough visual isolation to feel untouched by the modern world. Rather than bury the opportunity beneath elaborate planning, they climbed over the wall and placed Jackman and Comer there for a crucial confrontation between Robin and Brigid. A scene carrying enormous emotional weight emerged from something almost accidental, a location noticed on the walk back to the cars. Other sequences demanded months of preparation for minutes of screen time. The burning hut was constructed so it could remain engulfed for roughly 15 minutes at a stretch, allowing the actors and camera department to work around real flame. Production design and special effects built sections from metal that could be removed as the fire spread, controlling the structure's collapse without draining it of danger. Sarnoski had gained enough confidence from directing a larger studio production to attempt that practical scale, but he carried it out with an independent filmmaker's preference for immediacy. The flames illuminate real smoke, real surfaces and performers responding to heat occupying the same space. Nothing, however, tested the cast more severely than Robin's mud-soaked nighttime fight. Hugh Jackman filmed the sequence opposite Elijah Ungveri in cold conditions, performing close, exhausting choreography through a huge quantity of wet earth. One prolonged take pushed the combat into disturbing intimacy. After Robin delivers a devastating blow, he rests his head against his opponent's chest, collapsing the distance between killer and victim. Jackman joked that the scene could have resembled two lovers in another film, but that uncomfortable closeness was exactly what Sarnoski wanted. Violence here is not elegant. Two bodies become entangled until domination looks almost like dependency. Jackman called it the hardest thing he had ever done. The punishment began before Jackman reached the set. His transformation required long sessions with hairstylist Sean Flanagan and makeup artist Pamela S. Westmore, who built Robin's heavy gray beard, weathered skin, and wild silver hair. Jackman passed the time listening to 1970s music with the artists, turning the makeup trailer into a strangely relaxed preparation space for such a tortured character. The disguise was so effective that Jodie Comer initially failed to recognize him, identifying Jackman only after hearing his voice. That confusion carried a perfect symbolic charge. The familiar star had vanished, but the sound of the man remained. Murray Bartlett experienced an even more complete disappearance beneath the leper's coverings and physical effects. With much of his face obscured, crew members could pass him without realizing who he was. That anonymity mirrored the character's social position, but it also required Bartlett to rebuild his performance around his eyes, posture, and voice. Across the production, physical concealment was never treated as simple spectacle. Jackman, Bartlett, and the design teams used makeup and costume to limit recognizable star behavior. The actors could not rely on the audience's affection for their familiar faces. They had to communicate through what the transformations left exposed. For all the misery captured by the camera, the set itself was not ruled by gloom. Comer has praised Jackman for bringing humor and humility into an intense production, while both actors described Sarnoski as calm, confident, and quick to laugh. That contrast matters. Productions attempting severe material can sometimes mistake emotional suffering for artistic seriousness, exhausting everyone in the name of authenticity. Sarnoski appears to have created the opposite atmosphere, concentrated while filming, lighter between takes. Jackman later praised the depth and camaraderie of the cast and Irish crew, suggesting that the communal spirit behind the camera stood in sharp contrast to Robin's isolation within it. Sarnoski's directing style depended on trust rather than endless coverage. With relatively few takes, practical locations, and a tight schedule, departments could not operate as separate machines. The camera team needed to understand the effects. The effects team needed to protect performance. Actors had to stay emotionally available, while cold, wet, concealed beneath prosthetics or surrounded by fire. This collaborative pressure explains why the film's roughness feels cohesive. The mud belongs to the costumes belong to the bodies belong to the landscape. Nothing looks as though it was added merely because a medieval thriller was expected to contain it. That does not mean the production was chaotic. Its apparent rawness was engineered through preparation, then protected by flexibility. A hut was carefully designed to burn. A complex fight was choreographed until it could feel frighteningly uncontrolled. Historical locations were scouted, yet the filmmakers remained open enough to discover their final day image beside a parking lot. That combination, precision without stiffness, may be the clearest evidence of Sarnoski's growth. Pig taught him how to protect intimacy. A Quiet Place. Day One taught him how to command scale. The Death of Robin Hood required both lessons at once. The result is a film whose production hardship remains visible without becoming a publicity stunt. Cold looks cold, weight looks heavy, fire behaves like fire, and Jackman's exhaustion cannot be separated from Robin's. But artistic commitment does not determine commercial survival. Once the final shot was captured and A24 prepared this bleak, R-rated medieval meditation for a summer release, another battle began. One fought through theater counts, marketing costs, opening weekend numbers, and the difficult economics of selling audiences a Robin Hood film with almost none of the pleasures they normally expect. The cruelest twist in The Death of Robin Hood arrived outside the story. A film about a legendary hero discovering that his name no longer protects him entered theaters and learned much the same lesson. A24 released Michael Sarnoski's R-rated, 122-minute medieval drama across 762 North American theaters on June 19, 2026. It earned $2.87 million during its opening weekend, about $1,628 per location, and placed 8th on the finalized chart. Those numbers did not represent a quiet beginning with room to grow. They signaled immediately that the film's mixture of solemn pacing, graphic violence, and spiritual introspection had struggled to attract a broad summer audience. The release date made that struggle considerably harder. The Death of Robin Hood opened opposite Toy Story 5, which consumed the weekend with a $160 million domestic debut across 4,425 theaters. Other established releases, including Disclosure Day, Obsession, Backrooms, and Scary Movie, were already competing for adult and genre audiences. Sarnoski's film was never expected to challenge Pixar, but counter-programming works only when the alternative feels urgent. To casual moviegoers, a grim 2-hour meditation on an aging outlaw's guilt may have looked less like an escape from blockbuster entertainment than an emotional obligation. The opening itself was modest. What happened afterward was devastating. The film collected $615,892 during its second weekend, dropping 79% even while remaining in 1,580 theaters. By its third weekend, its footprint had collapsed to only 102 theaters, producing $58,145. The fourth weekend brought approximately $18,832 from 25 locations. Its domestic legs, the ratio between total earnings and the opening weekend, stood at only 183. In practical terms, more than half of its North American revenue arrived during its first 3 days, and word of mouth did not create the patient theatrical discovery an adult drama desperately needed. As of July 13, 2026, Box Office Mojo reports approximately $5.26 million from the United States and Canada, $1. $10 million internationally and $6.36 million worldwide. North America therefore accounts for roughly 83% of the reported global total, an unusual imbalance for a story built around one of England's most recognizable folk heroes. France supplied the strongest listed overseas result at about $344,000, followed by Australia at roughly $187. 0 in the United Arab Emirates at approximately $152,000. International figures may continue shifting as additional territories report, but the theatrical trajectory is already clear. This was not merely an American underperformance. The legend failed to travel. The numbers lists the production budget at $20 million, excluding any undisclosed marketing and distribution expenses. Against that figure, a worldwide theatrical gross slightly above $6 million is severe. Box office revenue does not return entirely to producers or distributors. Cinemas retain a share, and international arrangements vary by territory. It would therefore be misleading to treat the global gross as $6 million directly recovered against a $20 million investment. The film remains far below its production spending before advertising costs are even considered. Yet the precise loss cannot be calculated publicly because financing, acquisition terms, tax incentives, and A24's distribution agreement have not been fully disclosed. That distinction matters because A24 film does not automatically mean A24 personally financed every dollar. The listed production and financing companies include Lyrical Media and Ryder Picture Company, while A24 handled domestic distribution after acquiring the project. Different partners may therefore carry different portions of the risk. Still, from the audience's perspective, the commercial verdict is blunt. Hugh Jackman's star power, Jodie Comer's prestige, and Robin Hood's name were not enough to turn a contemplative death narrative into a theatrical event. Familiar intellectual property created recognition, but recognition did not become demand. The marketing faced a nearly impossible tonal problem. Sell the battles, Jackman's transformation, and the brutal medieval imagery too aggressively, and audiences may expect the propulsive revenge adventure the movie deliberately refuses to provide. Sell the grief, religious symbolism, and long silences honestly, and the campaign advertises an austere drama during one of the most competitive periods of the year. The recognizable name may even have worked against the film. Robin Hood usually promises movement, camaraderie, and rebellion. Sarnoski offers infection, regret, and approaching death. That creative reversal gives the film its identity, but it also makes the title resemble a contract the experience refuses to honor. The home entertainment window now carries greater importance than it would for a conventional theatrical success. A24's official page is already promoting digital pre-orders through Apple TV, Amazon, Fandango at Home, and Kaleidoscape, suggesting a rapid transition toward audiences more comfortable discovering demanding adult dramas at home. Digital rentals, purchases, eventual subscription licensing, and physical media sales can reduce the financial damage, especially for a film whose cast and striking visual identity may sustain long-term curiosity. But those downstream revenues are not currently public, and they should not be used to retroactively declare the theatrical result healthy. Commercially, the death of Robin Hood is an unmistakable disappointment. Artistically, that failure tells a more complicated story. The film was sold through a famous hero while rejecting nearly everything audiences associate with him. It entered a crowded summer marketplace with an adult rating, an unforgiving tone, and little interest in easy catharsis. Those choices deserve respect, but respect does not sell tickets by itself. Whether the movie eventually finds a larger life on home platforms will depend heavily on the conversation surrounding it, and that conversation began with critics and audiences sharply divided over whether Sarnoski had created a profound elegy or simply drained the legend of its pulse. The conversation surrounding the death of Robin Hood became an extension of the film itself, divided, severe, and haunted by expectations nobody could completely escape. Critics generally respected the ambition, yet admiration rarely became uncomplicated enthusiasm. As of July 13, 2026, Rotten Tomatoes records a 67% critic score from 153 reviews, while Metacritic assigns the film 60 out of 100 from 35 critics, figures that place it squarely between success and rejection. This was not a misunderstood film secretly loved by everyone who saw it. It was a fascinating object that many reviewers wanted to defend, even while admitting they did not fully enjoy sitting through it. The positive case begins with the film's refusal to behave like intellectual property. Brandon David Wilson's review for RogerEbert.com called it the Unforgiven of Robin Hood films, praising the way Sarnoski replaces franchise-minded mythology with an aging man awaiting judgment. Other favorable reviews responded to the same act of destruction. They admired a movie willing to strip a universally recognized character of romance, public virtue, and commercial usefulness. Robin Hood is not being prepared for another adventure. He is being examined after adventure has poisoned everything around him. For critics exhausted by risk-free reboots, that alone carried real value. Hugh Jackman became the closest thing to critical consensus. Supportive and skeptical reviewers repeatedly returned to the physical conviction of his performance. The broken posture, exhausted voice, and flashes of violence that make Robin's remorse feel attached to muscle memory. Roger Ebert. Com described this incarnation as one of the most interesting recent interpretations of the character, while Metacritic's review sample repeatedly identifies Jackman as the film's anchor even when the surrounding drama receives a mixed verdict. The comparisons to Logan were inevitable, but not empty. Both performances asked Jackman to dismantle an action hero through age, pain, and reluctant responsibility. Here, however, the moral stain runs deeper. Pat Scola's cinematography, the Irish locations, and Jim Geddes' folk-inflected score also attracted praise from viewers who found the narrative emotionally distant. Even reviews landing around the middle acknowledged the beauty of the mist-covered landscapes, the expressive shift in aspect ratio, and the atmosphere of a world rotting alongside its central figure. The craftsmanship is difficult to dismiss. Every frame carries intention. Every costume appears weighted by weather and history. Yet that technical authority produced a strange critical response. The film was often admired as an object before it was embraced as an experience. People could explain why the images worked while still wondering why the characters had not moved them more deeply. That emotional distance became the central negative argument. The Guardian praised the atmosphere and performances, but found the characters insufficiently developed and the tonal movement between savage action and meditative drama unfocused. Screen Daily reached a harsher conclusion, describing the picture as visually rich but excessively brooding and dramatically uninspired. The playlist's mixed review admired the technical execution, while arguing that the film never provided enough detail to invite viewers fully into the characters' inner lives. Different language, same wound. Sarnoski built an elaborate moral reckoning around relationships that some critics felt remained more symbolic than human. Then there is the pacing. The film opens with enough brutality to suggest a medieval survival thriller, only to retreat into bedsides, rituals, and conversations about redemption. Viewers who accepted that rupture experienced it as the entire point, the violent man being deprived of action until he has no weapon left except honesty. Others felt the movie simply stopped. Metacritic's review distribution captures that hesitation. 51% of its sampled critics were positive, 43% mixed, and only 6% outright negative. Hatred was relatively uncommon. Frustration was everywhere. The film did not repel most critics. It left them stranded between respect and emotional surrender. Audience response tilted colder. Rotten Tomatoes lists a 56% verified popcorn meter score from more than 250 ratings, while Metacritic's limited user sample sits at 5.2 out of 10. Positive viewers praised the deliberate pace, revisionist approach, and movement from brutality toward uncertain redemption. Negative viewers described the second half as boring, disappointing, or fundamentally unlike the Robin Hood story they had paid to see. That last complaint may sound superficial, but it points toward a genuine artistic problem. A film can subvert expectations brilliantly and still underestimate how much emotional preparation viewers need before familiar pleasures are removed. The Sydney Film Festival positioned the movie as a radical, brutal reimagining driven by Jackman's performance, giving it a prestige-oriented launch before the American theatrical release. But its cultural impact quickly became less about a festival triumph than a debate over the current fashion for dark reinterpretations. Is Sarnoski rescuing Robin Hood from sanitized nostalgia? Or applying the familiar revisionist formula in which childhood heroes must be exposed as violent frauds? The film earns the first reading through its compassion and visual discipline. It invites the second through a solemnity so relentless that even tenderness can feel coated in mud. No viral joke or broad political controversy has overtaken the movie. Its most revealing cultural response is quieter. The gap between people who call it meditative and those who call it lifeless. Both are reacting to the same long pauses, the same refusal of heroic release, and the same decision to make redemption uncertain rather than exhilarating. That division may ultimately help the film. Works positioned in the respectable middle are easily forgotten. Films that provoke sharply different descriptions can grow through argument, especially once removed from the commercial pressure of opening weekend. The early verdict, then, is neither vindication nor burial. The death of Robin Hood has been recognized as bold, exquisitely crafted, and powerfully acted, while also being criticized as emotionally undernourished, punishingly slow, and overly impressed by its own gravity. Those responses are not mutually exclusive. They describe the same film from opposite sides of the wound. The final question is whether its severity carries meaning beyond the immediate experience, whether Robin's death says something lasting about guilt, legends, and the stories societies build around violent men. That is where judgment ends and interpretation begins. The film's finale, discussed in full from this point onward, reveals what the death of Robin Hood has really been killing, not Robin's body. That outcome was promised by the title. Michael Sarnoski is killing Robin's belief that a violent life must end through spectacular violence. Robin expects enemies at the priory, arrows from the roof, and one final opportunity to transform slaughter into heroism. The audience expects it too. Instead, he discovers that the right death is not the loudest or most impressive one. It is the death that finally stops him from turning another person into a weapon. That realization gives the movie its first central theme. Redemption is not the cancellation of guilt. Robin cannot perform one noble act and balance the moral account. No rescued child can restore Brigid's murdered family. No confession can return the countless bodies left behind by the merry men. Sarnoski rejects the cinematic arithmetic, in which a villain sacrifices himself during the climax and instantly becomes good. Robin's final progress is smaller and more difficult. He tells Godwin to abandon vengeance. He protects Margaret without training her to become another killer. Most painfully, he tells Brigid the truth when silence could have preserved her affection. That confession is the real climax. Robin learns that the leper is Guy of Gisborne, a former enemy whose body he mutilated, and that Brigid's husband and children died after Robin's men trapped them inside a burning house. Suddenly, the Priory stops looking like a place fate randomly selected for his recovery. It becomes a community built partly from the human wreckage he created. Robin has been receiving food, friendship, and medical care from his own victims. Cruel irony, perfect judgment. The people he reduced to suffering have developed a greater capacity for mercy than the hero celebrated in his name. Sarnoski also refuses to make that mercy clean. Brigid begins the fatal bloodletting in rage, confronting Robin with the murder of her family. Then revenge loses its certainty. She stops. Robin asks her to continue, turning the act into something suspended between execution, assisted death, and spiritual release. The morality remains uncomfortable because comfort would cheapen both characters. Brigid does not forgive the crime. Robin does not receive divine proof that he has been absolved. They simply choose to prevent his final moments from repeating the hatred that shaped their lives. What begins as revenge becomes an intimate death they create together. That is why Robin's request to be healed carries such force. Healing usually means survival. Here it means being released from the identity that taught him survival was the only law. Earlier, he imagined a good death as physical domination, enemies defeated, legends secured, pain converted into applause. By the end, he accepts dependence. He lies in bed while another person controls whether he continues breathing. For a man who spent his life using power to determine who lived and died, surrender becomes his final moral action. Not victory, not punishment, surrender. Margaret's arrow completes the transformation of the legend. In traditional versions of Robin Hood's death, the dying outlaw fires an arrow and asks to be buried where it lands. Sarnoski gives that action to a child. Robin no longer controls the direction of his story. Margaret does. She fires while he tells her about Little John preserving the father without preserving every violent truth surrounding him. The gesture acknowledges that stories will continue after facts become unreachable. The crucial difference is that Robin's last story offers a child love rather than instructions for vengeance. His legend becomes useful only after he releases ownership of it. This brings the film to its second major theme. Stories are dangerous because people live according to them. Robin believed the story that violence made him powerful. Little John believed loyalty required participation in that violence. Their enemies believed revenge would restore what had been taken. England believed Robin was a generous champion because songs transformed bloodshed into rebellion. Jackman has described the film as a warning about inherited narratives, personal, national, and religious, that remain destructive when nobody examines them. The movie is not asking audiences to stop telling stories. It is asking who benefits from the version being told. Sarnoski's personal connection gives this argument unexpected tenderness. His childhood fascination with Robin's quiet death became inseparable from losing his father after a canoe trip that contained both tranquil beauty and violent natural danger. In the filmmaker's own reflection, death and transcendence are not opposites. They exist beside one another. That idea shapes the final room. Blood leaves Robin's body, yet sunlight and calm replace the mud and screaming of the opening. The film does not escape brutality. It integrates brutality into a larger experience that also contains care, memory, and silence. Does every piece reach that depth? No. The movie's symbolism is sometimes richer than its characterization. Brigid can feel written as the embodiment of mercy before she feels like a complete woman. Godwin and Margaret occasionally function as competing futures more than fully dimensional young people. The pacing is so determined to create contemplation that it occasionally produces emotional distance instead. Some dialogue explains ideas the images have already expressed more powerfully. The film understands Robin's body better than it always understands the people surrounding him. That weakness keeps the experience from achieving the devastating completeness of Pig. But when it works because Sarnoski refuses the easy version at every turn. Jackman gives the legend physical weight, Comer gives mercy an edge, Pat Scola turns aspect ratio into psychology, and Jim Geddes' music makes history sound like a wound carried through generations. This is not the definitive Robin Hood film. It depends too heavily on our memory of warmer versions to stand as the character's primary incarnation. It works better as an epilogue to the entire cultural tradition. A funeral held after Errol Flynn's grin. Disney's Fox and decades of heroic arrows have left the room. Its legacy cannot be settled weeks after release, especially following such a weak theatrical performance and divided reception, yet those conditions may eventually suit it. This is the kind of film more likely to find defenders gradually than conquer an opening weekend. Viewers discovering it at home, expecting medieval action, and finding an austere moral drama instead. Some will call it empty. Others will revisit it and notice that the supposed emptiness is filled with breath, weather, hesitation, and people deciding whether pain must always reproduce itself. My verdict lands firmly on the positive side, with reservations. 8 out of 10. The middle stretches, several supporting characters remain underwritten, and the seriousness can become suffocating. Yet its finest choices are difficult to shake. The death of Robin Hood takes a hero famous for firing arrows, gives its most meaningful shot to a child. It takes a man who thought death required an audience and lets him disappear quietly among people he once harmed. Robin Hood does not earn innocence. He achieves something smaller, sadder, and far more human. He finally stops asking how a legend should die and learns how a man should.